Hello and welcome to another edition of The Complete Works. I am your host, Doug Hess, and if you're tuning in for the first time to The Complete Works, welcome. To give you a little idea of what we do on this podcast is that we discuss a specific movie of a film actor, actress, director, or composer of a film, and we're looking at their film career, one movie at a time, and so on each podcast, we're going to dissect and talk a little bit about a particular individual and their film career. Currently, we're working our way through the Nicolas Cage films, and on this edition of the podcast, The Complete Works, we are going to be discussing the movie Army of One, starring Nicolas Cage, and it also has Russell Brand in it as well. If you'd like to find more information about the Complete Works podcast, you can go to film-book.com by using the search term The Complete Works. You can also email us at podcast@film-book.com with The Complete Works in the subject line or Army of One. We'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you hear on this particular podcast or any of our podcasts, please hit the subscription button. That way, every time that we upload another edition of The Complete Works, it'll be delivered right to your device for you to be able to listen to. As we always do on The Complete Works, we'd like to start off a little bit, talking a little bit about some of the trivia of the movie before we really jump into it. And in this one, An Army of One, which was released in 2016, the Army of One, hence the title, was actually the recruiting slogan that was used by the United States Army between 2001 and 2006. Okay. The footage of then President Obama announcing the death of Osama bin Laden is real. That's actual footage in there, although it's not played in the correct order out there. Another trivia point is when Gary, who is played by Nicolas Cage, and his friends, they go to Las Vegas, he mentions that it was a plan of the all-knowing, all-seeing God. The very next scene then cuts into a TV screen that shows an eye, hints at what Gary had just said about the all-knowing, all-seeing eye. We'll also notice that Nicolas Cage and Matthew Modine previously acted together in the movie Birdie, and so they had starred together. The running time of this movie is approximately 93 minutes. It was released very limited in theaters on November the 4th, 2016, and then it went to a DVD premiere on November the 15th of 2016. The cast that makes up this movie, Army of One, I'll just give you a few of the names that's out there. Obviously, Nicolas Cage is playing Gary Faulkner, and Russell Brand plays God in this movie. Wendy McLendon-Covey is Marcy Mitchell. Paul Scheer plays Pickles. Will Sasso, I hope I'm saying that right, Sasso plays Roy in the movie in terms of this. One other thing that I should say or really mention about this movie, it's a comedy. It's meant to be a comedy. It's R for the language and some drug use that's in the film. So I'll give you a little heads up on that. It was directed by Larry Charles. Now, Larry Charles, you might recognize the name with Larry Charles. And he had really cut his teeth, if you will, on the movie, or I should say on TV shows, Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, before going and directing the comedy. A lot of people are calling it a masterpiece, Borat, before throwing this movie together, Army of One, starring Nicolas Cage. So just to let you know a little bit about that, so Larry Charles had really had his teeth cut, like I just said, really on the small screen on TV before going over to the big screen. And so he had one hit on his hand. We'll get into the movie and the details here in a few minutes, but I'm not going to say this was a hit by no means. And I'll give you my reasonings and rankings here in just a little bit in terms of that. So who wrote this movie? It was written by Scott Rothman and Rajiv Joseph. Again, I hope I'm saying that right. Regine Joseph. In terms of that, the studio is Condé Nast Entertainment, who released the film, or the studio in terms of that. So let's get back to the story, Army of One, starring Nicolas Cage. This movie this story, I should say, is based on a real life situation regarding Gary Faulkner, who decides to travel to Pakistan looking for Osama bin Laden in terms of that. Gary Faulkner, you may or may not recall, was kind of in the news cycle back in 2010 because he was from Colorado. He was a Colorado man, or from the state of Colorado, we should say. He was dubbed the Rocky Mountain Rambo, who, with no training or supplies, we could also even say with no common sense, he decides that he's going to take it upon himself to travel to Pakistan to capture Osama bin Laden. Now, Gary is an individual that has some long, straggly hair. When he speaks, it's very energetic type of pattern. And he has no skills. He has no military training. And he decides to go over to Pakistan with nothing more than a sword that he had purchased on the home shopping network, and decides to jump on an airplane and travel over to Pakistan to fulfill his mission. And before he takes off, he basically lets everybody know, he lets us know that he is, in a way, kind of received this message from God. So he's kind of like this American samurai that goes on this mission. He says that he received it from God, and he's determined to take matters into his own hands because he's very frustrated with the lack of progression that the U.S. government is having on tracking down bin Laden. So the question becomes, is Gary Faulkner a hero, or is he a crackpot? And I think if you look at this movie, or you look at this film, you will find that, or it makes him, in my opinion, come across as just that, a crackpot. Somebody that really you can't take serious in the process, that he basically is doing more harm than good out there. So what really inspired this movie was from a GQ profile of Faulkner by Chris Heath, and it was titled Army of One, and it really kind of mocks, if you will, the blue-collar worker who is, like I said, really frustrated on the process of the U.S. government trying to find bin Laden, so he decides he needs to take it in his own hand. In a way, the reason it's a comedy is because they're making fun of Gary in the process, and in a way, you almost have to say, yes, it is silly. It is a comedy, and why I say that is because who would go out and try to capture or kill bin Laden by themselves with nothing more than a sword, what I'm going to call a samurai sword, and travel to Pakistan to try to capture or kill bin Laden? And so, does the movie have some funny parts in it? Absolutely it does. I'll give you an example of one. Unfortunately, it's very far and in between. Some of the comedy, some of it is just plain not funny, in my personal opinion. But basically, when he goes to the airlines, he's trying to buy this ticket to go overseas, and there is this exchange with the airline trying to talk him out of telling him that he can't take his $300 sword that he had purchased overseas, so he has to store it and then send it over. And just because you think that might be odd, walking around with an American with a sword, that doesn't stop Gary or Nicolas Cage of trying to wield the sword in the streets of Pakistan. In terms of that, How did I find Nicolas Cage? I think he was probably trying to play this role over the top. Nicolas Cage, I would say, my own personal opinion, is more of an actor with drama than he is with comedy. Even though I think he does have some moments where comedy works for Nicolas Cage. The movie that comes to my mind in this example would be The Rock with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage in it, where he has some moments of that over-the-top comedy moments, but they're just little bursts and they work. In this particular movie, you have a couple of them, but overall, I didn't find the movie to be funny other than the idea of the movie itself. Okay, and I think most people would find, if you're looking at this truthfully, that it's kind of crazy to think that a guy could go overseas and try to capture Bin Laden. Now, does that mean that Gary doesn't make some new friends in Pakistan? Absolutely. I also think he makes some enemies with the CIA. We see Russell Brand playing God. Russell Brand has his place, but personally, I don't think it's in this movie. Playing God from that standpoint, but I do think it's it's an interesting concept, but the movie was kind of thrown together, in my opinion, and it was meant to be funny, and unfortunately, overall, I didn't find that to be the actual case in this in this movie of Army of One. Again, there were some moments in that. Now, I would tell you that most of the critics would agree with me. The film critics, if you go out there and look at the critics, most of them are say that, this is over the top. This is not a very good movie. They give it some negative ratings. Matter of fact, some of it even said that it looked like Nicolas Cage was just doing it because he needed the money, and they were trying to put something together in a very short time frame. What's interesting, though, if you go out to like Rotten Tomato or some of the other sites and you get away from the film critics, actually what is interesting is the actual fans. Now, there wasn't a lot of reviews, so I don't want to make it sound like it's over the top, but you find more and more individuals that actually enjoyed the movie, thought it was funny, saw it for what it was, and that was just a comedy show with an individual who kind of goes over the top in terms of that. Now, Gary Faulkner, I did a little bit of research on who he was. He was an ex-con. He was also an unemployed handyman. What's also interesting is he was diabetic, and so throughout the movie, he has some what's the word I'm looking for? Some hallucinations because he needed to be on dialysis, and so very serious matter. When it comes with somebody being diabetic, but also if you're not taking care of yourself properly, you can see some of that hallucination, and I think that comes through in the movie where I don't think Gary is in his right mind. He's sick. Obviously, he needs some help in terms of that, but overall, I would personally rate this movie on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being outstanding, 1 being negative. I really thought this was probably a 3, maybe a 3.5. I would go on the scale, just to be nice, but I really couldn't get more than 3.5. I found it hard to sit through the 93 minutes because at times I struggled to have this film keep my attention. It was billed as a comedy. Yes, there were some moments of comedy in it, but overall, times I just personally struggle to keep through and watch the film. Again, I would have to agree with most of the critics, whereas a lot of people that actually watched the film actually thought it wasn't that bad and entertaining. So, again, take it for what it's worth, and I'd encourage you to watch the film and come up with your own instincts, your own thoughts regarding Army One, starring Nicolas Cage. Again, it was released in 2016. It's loosely based on a true story. I say loosely because nothing's ever exact, especially when Hollywood gets involved. I understand why. I'm not trying to downplay that at all, because you're trying to take a period of time and shrink it into a 93-minute film. And so sometimes you do have to take some of that liberty in order to achieve what you want to achieve in the film. So Army One, I'm going to say a 3.5 in terms of my review. 3.5 just because I like Nicolas Cage, and but I would encourage you to watch the film yourself and take your own decision, make your own decision. So I want to thank you for listening to this episode of The Complete Works. You can find out more of my work on the film-book.com. Just search for Doug Hess or The Complete Works. You can also find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. Again, that's HessDoug14. And if you're listening to the podcast on iTunes or another podcast service, please rate and review this episode. If you're listening to the podcast on our YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like our video, subscribe to our channel, and leave us a comment in the comment section in terms of that. Next time, tune in next time when I review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We want to thank you for listening to The Complete Works. And again, check us out, like us, hit the subscription button so we can make sure that we have our next podcast delivered directly to you. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you then. Take care, everyone. And then you might even ask yourself that, wow, this guy has friends, and yes, that's where, the Nicolas Cage and Christopher Matthew Cook comes in, Diesel and Troy come into the movie. I would classify this movie, Dog Eat Dog. Again, it's a 2006. I would say it's a very dark comedy / action thriller. And you might say a comedy because some of the things that you see, you're just like, it's almost stupid comedy. Like I mentioned, when he kills his girlfriend's daughter and he shouts out the line. I had it written down here. I didn't hear nothing about no cupcakes. It's not funny, but it is, because it almost doesn't work to a degree, in my opinion, in terms of that. So, yes, I would say that it's very dark. I think there's portions of a thriller in here, and also portions of a comedy and even action that Schrader portrays in this movie. The screenplay was by Matthew Wilder, and again, told you earlier, it's loosely based on the book by the same name, Dog Eat Dog, by Edward Bunker, back in 1995. In terms of that, overall, how would I, depict this movie or even talk about this movie? I had a chance to go out and look at some of the reviews, like Rotten Tomato. I try to give you a review of where Rotten Tomato has this at. He gave it a 50%. It was right there at a 5 out of 10 in terms of that, based on 68 reviews from Rotten Tomato. In my personal opinion, I think it got that high of a score just because it had Nicolas Cage and William Dafoe in it. I would probably personally put it down more of a 3, in my personal opinion. just because I didn't think it worked, to be honest with you. I like Nicolas Cage, and I really like William Dafoe. I liked him in Platoon. He was also in American Psycho. Mississippi Burning is another film with William Dafoe in it. He's a great actor, but to me, this movie, Dog Eat Dog, didn't work. I regret that I didn't have time, or I haven't taken the time, maybe is the best way of saying it, is to read Dog Eat Dog. I might have had a different opinion of the movie if I had a chance to read the book first. I might have given it a little bit higher. I haven't. I didn't. So again, I would say overall, I would give this film more of a 3 instead of a 5. I did see where some of the critics actually gave this even a lower than a 5. One critic from Slate magazine actually gave it a 1.5 out of 4 stars and commented that the film had a few thrilling moments, but its pleasure are fleeting and always balanced by oppression, ugliness. It really is even deeper dive into the smile between chaos rather than compassion and contentment. So across the board, I would say that most people had it at a 5 or lower, which means that only about 50% actually enjoyed the movie. I'm going to be honest, I was not one that really enjoyed it. Matter of fact, about halfway through the movie, I was looking at my watch saying, how much longer do I have to watch this show? In terms of that, let's just give me an honest review. Again, even though it's got some actors with names in it, I just wanted to get it over with, personally, in terms of that. So, some other information about the film. The film was the closing entry for the director's fortnight section of the 2016 Cannes Film Festival. In terms of that, the principal photography of the film began on October the 19th, 2015 in Cleveland, Ohio. Filming also took place in Sheffield Lake, and it ended on November the 23rd, 2015. And like I said, they only took 25 days to shoot the film, and most of the crew were recent film graduates in terms of that. It was released on November the 4th, 2016 in the United States. Again, on May 20th of 2016, it was at the Cannes Film Festival. In terms of budget, I had did some research on that. It looked like they had a budget of approximately $40 million. But it didn't even make $1 million back at the box office. So it was basically a bust from the start. Like I said, I didn't enjoy the movie. I thought it was at times very painful to watch, even though you've got two great actors in there. You know, Nicolas Cage can be spotty at times, but overall, I think he's a great actor. William Dafoe, like I said, 3 or 4 different movies that come to my mind immediately with him in it, and I found him to be just a very good actor as well. But in this particular movie, Dog Eat Dog, it was a flop in my opinion, and really a disappointment, to be honest with you, in terms of that. So, not that it didn't have its great moments at times, but overall, it was just flat for me, and it's actually kind of hard to talk about it, to be honest with you, because I didn't enjoy it that much in terms of that. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to give the benefit out of the doubt in terms of that. So, sorry for the poor review on terms of that, but I'm just trying to give you my honest opinion and feedback. Again, like I said, I wish I would have taken the time to have read the book first, but I didn't, and that's fine in terms of that. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of The Complete Works as we work our way through the Nicolas Cage movie history. This film was Dog Eat Dog. You can find out more of our work on film-book.com. Just search for Doug Hess or The Complete Works. You can also find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. Again, that's HessDoug at 14. If you're listening to podcasts or on iTunes or another podcast service, please rate us, review, like the episode. And if you're listening to podcasts on your YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like us on our video. And again, subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment in the comment section. Send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Get your take on this podcast or on others. Again, if you like what you hear, we encourage you to like the podcast. Hit the subscription button so every week we can go ahead and have that signed up to you, or sent to you, I should say. Feel free to email us at podcast@film-book.com. Again, that's podcast@film-book.com. In the subject line, write The Complete Works, episode 77, Dog Eat Dog, whatever. Get our attention. We'd love to hear from you in terms of that. So we're going to ask you to tune in next time when we review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We thank you for listening. We'll see you then. Take care, everyone. McVeigh for all charges on October the 30th. For all the charges on October the 30th in 2000. So some 60-some years later, 50, 60-some years later, President Clinton exonerates Captain McVeigh in terms of that. And so basically it was that pressure that got to him. And that's how the film really ends, is that Captain McVeigh just really couldn't take the torture, if you will. I hope I can say it that way, from the harassment. And it was just a terrible thing. I mean, I can't imagine being in the captain's position, but I cannot also imagine being one of the loved ones that lost a husband or a father or a brother in this event, or a son. And I could see both sides of this. And like I said, Captain McVeigh just really couldn't take the pressure, and unfortunately commits suicide from the harassment, for lack of a better word, in terms of that. Now, what's interesting, there's always a subplot in films like this. I shouldn't say always, but a lot of times. And basically we have two childhood friends, Indianapolis diver Brian Bam Smithwicks and a crew member, Mike Delanto. Long story short, both of these individuals fall in love with the same woman without the other knowing. So both of them are in love with the same woman. Neither one of them really knows it. D'Anto purchased an engagement ring before the trip, and he is going to propose. Who tells? The trip. Basically, long story short, again, the two of them get into it, a brawl involving two of the crewmen. So the Antio loses a ring, and one of the other crew members, Alvin, steals it after the ship is destroyed. Smithwick and D'Antolo spend the next few days in the sea with the rest of the crew, where D'Antolo succumbs to massive leg injuries received in a shark attack, and Smithwick is given the engagement ring by Alvin. Band proposes to Antonio's fiancée Claire to help raise their child, and she accepts their proposal. While the credit rolls, two Navy sailors re-encounter the sharks in the water, and the real rescue footage is shown along with many still shots of the lost sailors in the Pacific Ocean at that day. Just a really terrible situation based on a true story and event. So the question then becomes Nicolas Cage and his performance in the USS Indianapolis. I thought he was okay. I mean, I would say that, like I've said in so many of these, it wasn't his best, but I wouldn't say it was his worst. I would, on a scale 1 to 10, I'm a little bit more down the middle. I would lean towards a 6, maybe even a 6.5 out of a 10 in terms of that. Just because, well, I'm a history buff, and I really love those types of movies, and so I would give him the benefit of the doubt. Like I said, though, it wasn't one of his worst performances by no means, but it wasn't one of his best either. So I'm going to go somewhere between a 6.5 in terms of that. Like I said, others with Rotten Tomato only gave it a 17. But again, that was based only on 11 reviews. I stick by my earlier comments regarding the USS Indianapolis, in the sense that the USS Indianapolis is one of those historical events that's out there, but a lot of people just don't know the story. If it wasn't for the movie Jaws in 1975, I think even fewer people would understand or have any historical reference regarding the USS Indianapolis in terms of that. We see that on February the 5th, 2015, Nicolas Cage was set to play the lead role of Captain McVeigh in the film. We see that Matt Lanter was set on April the 1st, 2015 to play U.S. Navy diver Chief Petty Officer Brian Bam Smithwick. Lanter revealed to the producers after his audition that his grandfather, Kinley Lantern, was a signalman on the Indianapolis. Furthermore, Lantern's father, Joe Lantern, is a chairman of the Second Watch, an organization of survivors and their families. Joe Lantern and his co-chair, Mario Bullard, stayed in contact with the producers during pre-production and were welcomed to the set during the photography. Then on May the 13th, 2015, it was revealed that Tom Sizemore, Thomas Jane, and Brian Presley would also join the cast for the film in terms of that. On July the 15th, 2015, Cody Walker was cast in the film to play one of the crewmen aboard the ship. And like I said, that was his acting debut in terms of that. See here, principal photography on the film began on June the 19th, 2015 in Mobile, Alabama, with many of the scenes shot aboard the battleship USS Alabama, which I discussed earlier, that was to take place or be to be in place of the Indianapolis. Filming also took place in San Francisco and over in Japan, but the producers later opted to double Mobile for both San Francisco and Japan in terms of that. And then on June the 27th, 2015, filming was underway in Orange Beach in terms of that for the film. After filming on July the 14th in downtown Mobile, Nicolas Cage met a real Navy veteran named Richard Stevens on a beach at Peneville Square. Stevens was one of the survivors of the ship USS Indianapolis. So Cage and Stevens had a long talk about the disaster, and I'm sure got a much deeper appreciation for the story and the events that those brave individuals went through. Again, what a terrible tragedy in history, and I just can't imagine what it would have been like floating in the ocean for 5 days with no food, with no water, no protection from the sun. Oh, and by the way, I'm surrounded by sharks that want to eat me because of everybody's injuries and the blood, et cetera, in terms of that. So, overall, like I said, Personally, I'm going to give this film a 6 out of a 10. One, just because I'm a little partial to history, but at the same time, I think it's a great story to tell. One thing I'm not too keen on is, but I understand why people do it. I understand why Hollywood does it, is to kind of bring the love story in the mix. I get it. It sells tickets. It's something that they want, they need. I get that. And so, it is what it is in terms of that. Okay? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of The Complete Works. We were discussing the film The USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, starring Nicolas Cage, that was released in 2016. You can find out more of my work on film-book.com. You can search my name, Doug Hess, or you can search The Complete Works. You can find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. And we thank you for listening. We encourage you, if you like what you've heard, to subscribe so we can have the podcast sent to you directly. And again, if you have any comments, you feel free to email us at podcast@film-book.com. Again, that's podcast@film-book.com. In the subject line, you can put in The Complete Works. You can put in the USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, or any of the other films that we're talking about. Again, we strongly encourage you to hit the subscription button. And until next week on The Complete Works, have a great week, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. That the audience was more willing to give the praise to the actor or actresses in the movie, but was a little standoffish when it came to the actual film. In terms of that, the audience polled by Cinema Score gave the film an average grade of A, on an A+ to an F. However, Stone works best when it's just Edward and the three journalists in the hotel room sweating it out, because they were deciding what they were going to release, when they were going to release it, etc. in terms of that. But for the actual material of the film, I think a lot of people, like I said, were just a little standoffish or a little squeamish. Now, let's fast forward to 2019, and with the current political climate that is out there, I'm not so sure that this film wouldn't get a much stronger praise from some of the critics when you're looking at the actual material, not the acting, but the message that's there. I think you'd probably have things a little bit different today in 2019 versus 2016, but I could be wrong on that. And again, like I said, I don't want to make this about politics. This is not the podcast for that. And if you're looking for that, there's other podcasts for you to join. I just want to stay with the entertainment value when it comes to with movies and Nicolas Cage, or The Complete Works in general, of whoever that we're talking about, an actor, actress, director, composer, etc. And let you, the audience, come up with your own thoughts and take on that. Okay? Well, that wraps up another edition of The Complete Works. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes or another podcast service, please, we encourage you to rate and review this episode. If you're listening to this podcast on the YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like us, our video, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. And we just ask that you tune in next time when we review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We want to thank you for listening. And again, if you like what you hear, please hit subscribe so we can have future editions of the podcast, The Complete Works, sent directly to you. Love to hear from you as well. Send us an email if you have any thoughts, comments, or concerns. And you can do that at podcast@film-book.com. And in the subject line, put in the complete works, Snowden, or any of the other other movies that we have been reviewing. And we hope to see you next time. So again, thanks for listening to the complete works. This has been an episode on Nicolas Cage, and the movie that we reviewed for Nicolas Cage was Snowden. So until next time, take care.